December 18th, 1972, 10:38 p.m. Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. The runway lights stretch forward into darkness, a long, glowing spine cutting through the Pacific night. Colonel James R. McCarthy, United States Air Force, sits strapped into the left seat of a B-52D Stratofortress, call sign Olive 02. The aircraft vibrates under full throttle. 16 engines scream in unison. The bomber is heavy, unusually heavy. Its bomb bays and wing pylons loaded to the limit. More than 70,000 pounds of ordnance. McCarthy doesn't speak, neither does his co-pilot. They've done the math too many times to pretend otherwise. This mission is different. Everyone on the flight line knows it. The ground crews know it. The crews taxiing behind them know it. This is not another pressure strike. This is Linebacker II. The brakes release. The aircraft surges forward. You can almost feel the weight resisting the climb as the B-52 lifts off, slow and deliberate, as if reluctant to leave the Earth. Guam disappears beneath cloud and darkness. Ahead lies a 13-hour flight, refueling tracks over the Pacific, and then North Vietnam. At nearly the same moment, halfway around the world, the lights are still on inside the White House. President Richard Nixon stands alone near a window, jacket off, tie loosened. On his desk lies a briefing folder marked Top Secret. The contents are blunt. Peace talks in Paris have collapsed. North Vietnam walked away in October, convinced the United States would eventually accept their terms. Years of gradual escalation had taught Hanoi that Washington always pulled back first. This time, Nixon has decided, they are wrong. Beside him earlier that evening stood Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor, voice calm but firm. Diplomacy, he argued, had reached its limit. Hanoi believed time was on their side. That belief had to be broken, not rhetorically, but physically. Nixon approved the order. Unrestricted B-52 strikes against targets in and around Hanoi and Haiphong, something no president had allowed before. Back in the air, McCarthy's bomber joins a stream of aircraft invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable on radar. Dozens of B-52s climbing into assigned corridors, each one a moving fortress. Fighters will not escort them all the way. This is not a typical strike package. The bombers will go in alone. At cruising altitude, the aircraft settles into its long, mechanical rhythm. Engines drone, checklists are read quietly. Somewhere over the Pacific, they refuel in silence. The tankers boom, locking in with a metallic thud. Hours pass. No one sleeps. McCarthy thinks about Hanoi. He has studied the maps. He knows the surface-to-air missile rings, the flak concentrations, the escape corridors. He knows the statistics too. How many B-52s have been lost so far in the war? Too many. He also knows the order came from the very top. This mission is meant to be seen. In Hanoi, air defense crews prepare with the discipline of men who have survived years of bombardment. Colonel Pham Tuan, one of North Vietnam's most respected pilots, has flown against American aircraft before. So have the missile crews under his command. They have learned patience. American strikes usually come in waves, then stop. Targets are hit, damage assessed, pauses follow. This night feels wrong. Radar screens begin to fill. Slow-moving returns at extreme altitude. Too high, too steady. Someone mutters the word B-52. Missile batteries power up. Crews wait for firing authorization. They have trained for this moment, but rarely seen it delivered at scale. For years, North Vietnamese leadership had dismissed the bomber as inefficient, large, predictable, vulnerable if enough missiles were fired. But tonight, there are too many targets, and they are coming straight in. As Olive 02 crosses the Vietnamese coast, the intercom crackles. Bomb run in 30 minutes. The bomber begins its gradual descent into the release corridor. The formation tightens, not visually, but mathematically. Every aircraft knows its exact position. A few seconds early or late could put one bomber inside another's blast pattern. The electronic warfare officer watches his screens light up. Radar locks, missile launches, bright symbols bloom across the display. Missile, 2 o'clock, climbing. McCarthy doesn't maneuver. He can't. The B-52 was never designed to dodge. Its defense is altitude, formation discipline, and electronic countermeasures. Flares eject. Jammers howl. The aircraft shudders as shock waves ripple through the air around it. Somewhere nearby, another bomber takes a hit. No one knows which one. At 10:41 p.m., the first bombs fall. They do not fall singly. They fall in grids. Entire sections of the earth vanish in overlapping patterns of fire and pressure. Rail yards disintegrate. Fuel depots erupt into rolling firestorms. Shockwaves punch through reinforced bunkers, bending steel doors inward. Miles away, windows implode. The ground does not shake, it convulses. From underground command centers, North Vietnamese officers listen as the city above them is torn apart in measured, relentless intervals. This is not the sporadic violence of earlier years. This is systematic. This is final. Back aboard Olive 02, the bomb release light flashes. Bombs away! The aircraft lurches upward as the weight vanishes instantly. The crew feels it in their chests. 70,000 pounds gone in seconds. McCarthy exhales for the first time in minutes. But the mission is not over. They must survive the exit. Behind them, Hanoi burns, and within North Vietnam's leadership, something far more dangerous than destruction has begun to spread. Doubt. The sky over Hanoi is no longer dark. It pulses. Each detonation arrives in sequence, measured, deliberate, merciless. The bombing does not wander. It does not search. It executes. Inside an underground command bunker near Ba Ding, senior North Vietnamese officers sit rigidly at a long table bolted to the concrete floor. Maps shake on the walls. Dust drifts down with every impact. Telephone lines crackle with half-formed reports. Rail yard Yen Vien, gone. King No fuel depot, burning uncontrollably. Power grid failure across western districts. No one raises their voice. Panic is useless here. For years, the leadership of the Vietnam People's Army had studied American behavior. Gradual escalation, political restraint, fear of civilian casualties near Hanoi. Every previous bombing campaign had followed a pattern: pressure, pause, negotiation. This night follows no such rules. The realization settles slowly, like a chill. This is not coercion. This is demonstration. At Phuc Yen Air Base, MiG crews scramble into cockpits lit by red emergency lamps. Colonel Pham Tuan listens as ground control vectors him toward a target he can barely comprehend. Multiple B-52 formations, high altitude, heavy jamming. Tuan has fought Americans before. He has beaten them before. He knows their tactics, their habits. But this is not a dogfight. This is interception against something closer to a moving mountain range. He climbs hard, engines screaming, fuel bleeding away by the second. Radar locks flicker on and off through electronic noise. Missiles chase ghosts. One launch tracks true, then vanishes into interference. Above him, bombs fall anyway. Tuan watches the horizon glow white, then orange, then black. Even the air seems wounded. Back in the bombers, survival is no longer abstract. As Olive 02 turns onto its escape heading, warning tones scream through the cockpit. Missile, 6 o'clock, climbing fast. The electronic warfare officer fires countermeasures again. Chaff blooms into silver clouds. Jammers spike. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a violent concussion slams the aircraft. Not a hit, but close enough. The B-52 shudders like a struck bell. Alarms flash. One engine flames out, another sputters. McCarthy grips the controls, knuckles white. Training takes over. He keeps the aircraft level, keeps it flying. They are still alive. Not all crews are. Over Hanoi, one B-52 spirals downward, trailing fire, its massive frame breaking apart in the night. The explosion lights up entire neighborhoods. North Vietnamese crews cheer. But the cheers die quickly, because the bombing does not stop. Wave after wave follows, precisely timed. Crews barely finish reloading missiles before new formations arrive. Some SAM sites fire until their launch rails glow red, then are erased minutes later by delayed strikes. This is not an exchange. It is attrition measured in minutes. By dawn, the damage is impossible to disguise. Entire transportation corridors are gone. Warehouses lie flattened into indistinguishable debris. Fires still burn where water mains have ruptured. Smoke blankets the city, thick and bitter. And this was only the first night. In Washington, the mood is tense but controlled. President Nixon is briefed before sunrise. Casualty figures are incomplete. Aircraft losses confirmed, more likely unreported. But the strikes achieved their objectives. The bombers reached Hanoi. They hit their targets. They returned. For Nixon, this matters. For months, Hanoi had delayed negotiations, convinced the United States lacked the will to escalate further. Now, that assumption is bleeding into the streets of their capital. Kissinger studies satellite imagery quietly. He does not celebrate. He calculates. This campaign is not meant to last forever. It is meant to change minds. Back in North Vietnam, leadership debates through exhaustion. Some argue endurance. They have endured worse. Others quietly acknowledge what the numbers show. Industrial damage accumulating faster than it can be repaired. Stockpiles shrinking. Air defenses thinning. Most dangerous of all, predictability is gone. American restraint has vanished. The bombers return the next night, and the next. Each strike tighter, more efficient, less forgiving. The jungle that once swallowed damage cannot protect concrete, steel, and centralized infrastructure. And deep inside the bunker, an unspoken thought forms. If this continues, time is no longer on our side. The war has not been lost, but control of its pace has. And that may be enough. December 20th, 1972, 2:17 a.m. over the Red River Delta. The bombers are already inbound again. Colonel James McCarthy hasn't slept more than 2 hours since the first mission. None of the crews have. The fatigue is bone deep now, the kind that settles behind the eyes and dulls the edges of thought. But the procedures are automatic. Checklists, fuel, altitude, timing. Everything in this war, suddenly, is about timing. The B-52 formations are adjusted between nights, routes refined, bombing boxes tightened, gaps identified and exploited. This is not repetition, it is learning at industrial speed. From the cockpit, McCarthy watches the electronic warfare display flicker like a living thing. North Vietnamese radar operators are adapting too. Missile launches are better timed, traps more coordinated. The enemy is learning, but not fast enough. Another bomber explodes somewhere ahead. The shockwave ripples through the formation like a physical reminder. This is still dangerous, still lethal. But the formations hold. They always hold. On the ground in Hanoi, endurance begins to look different by the third night. Colonel Pham Tuan moves between command posts, listening more than speaking. His pilots are exhausted. Missile crews are depleted. Reload times stretch longer. Launch rails sit empty for critical minutes. The American bombers are not trying to destroy everything. They are targeting what matters most. Power, fuel, transportation, communications, the arteries. Each loss compounds the next. A destroyed rail yard delays repairs elsewhere. A destroyed fuel depot grounds aircraft. A disabled radar station creates blind spots that cannot be filled quickly. This is no longer about surviving bombs. It is about whether the system can still function. Inside the Politburo, the conversations turned sharper. General Tho Nguyen Giap, the architect of earlier victories, listens carefully as reports arrive. He has spent decades studying enemies stronger on paper. He understands patience. He understands sacrifice. But he also understands systems. And systems are failing. The leadership had always believed the Americans would stop first. Domestic pressure, media scrutiny, fear of escalation. That belief had shaped every negotiation. Now that assumption is under assault, not by ideology, by tempo. The strikes come nightly, relentlessly, no pauses, no signaling pauses, no time to rebuild, to adapt fully, to breathe. For the first time, Hanoi is not dictating the rhythm of the war. Washington is. In the United States, the public reaction is mixed, but unmistakable. Television screens show smoke rising over Hanoi. Headlines use words not seen in years. Massive, unprecedented, escalation. Some protest, others watch in silence. But one thing changes across the country. The war suddenly feels real again. Not abstract, not distant, not measured in charts. It has weight. Nixon understands this risk. He accepts it. He has bet that a short, violent shock will cost less, politically and militarily, than an endless stalemate. Kissinger agrees. The window is narrow. The message must be unmistakable. The bombing is not an end. It is a lever. Back in the air, McCarthy watches Hanoi burn for the third time. He does not feel triumph. He feels pressure. Every crew knows this campaign cannot continue indefinitely. Losses are mounting. Each B-52 destroyed is irreplaceable in the short term. Each crew lost is irreplaceable forever. The question hangs unspoken in every cockpit. How long can this last? On December 22nd, North Vietnamese air defenses score their most significant success yet. Several B-52s are downed in a single night. Celebrations erupt briefly, but the relief fades quickly. Because the next night, the bombers return again. Adjusted, smarter, deadlier. The Americans absorb losses and adapt. That, more than the bombs themselves, begins to erode confidence. In underground rooms lit by bare bulbs, senior officials begin to speak openly of negotiation, not as strategy, but as necessity. The infrastructure damage is no longer theoretical. Repair crews are overwhelmed. Fuel shortages loom. Air defenses cannot be sustained indefinitely at current expenditure rates. This is not defeat, but it is constraint. And constraint changes decisions. The clock, once assumed to favor endurance, is now ticking the other way. As Christmas approaches, the strikes briefly pause. The silence is unsettling. In Hanoi, leaders wait, unsure whether this is restraint returning or something worse preparing. In Guam, crews wait too, restless, exhausted, aware that whatever comes next will decide far more than a bombing campaign. The pause ends, and when the bombers return, they will carry more than explosives. They will carry the weight of a decision finally forming in the shadows of power. December 26, 1972, 11:02 p.m. Andersen Air Force Base, Guam. The pause is over. Colonel James McCarthy stands on the tarmac beneath harsh floodlights, helmet tucked under his arm. The Christmas break had lasted just long enough to be unsettling, long enough for rumors to circulate, long enough for crews to wonder whether the bombing had worked, or whether something far worse was coming. Now they have their answer. The mission briefing is shorter than usual. Fewer words, more eye contact. Routes adjusted, targets refined, bomb loads recalculated. Hanoi again, but tighter, deadlier. The crews understand what this means. The pause was not restraint returning, it was preparation. In North Vietnam, the silence had not brought relief, it had brought dread. During the pause, leadership meetings stretch late into the night. Damage assessments arrive with brutal clarity. Rail capacity is crippled. Power generation unstable. Fuel reserves dangerously low. Missile inventories shrinking faster than replacements can arrive from China or the Soviet Union. Worst of all, American patterns are evolving. The B-52s are no longer predictable. General Vo Nguyen Giap listens as intelligence officers describe the new bombing boxes. Narrower, overlapping, designed to neutralize entire air defense sectors before they can react. This is no longer a test of endurance. It is a test of systems under stress, and the system is bending. The bombers lift off from Guam in darkness once again. McCarthy settles into his seat, hands moving through procedures he could perform blindfolded. The aircraft hums beneath him, a familiar vibration that now feels almost personal. He thinks briefly of home, then he shuts it out. Hours later, over the Gulf of Tonkin, the formation tightens. Refueling complete. Radios silent. The aircraft climb. When the Vietnamese coastline appears on radar, the tension returns instantly. Missile launches begin earlier this time, more coordinated, more desperate. The electronic warfare officer's voice is steady but clipped. Threats everywhere. Countermeasures deployed continuously. This is the most dangerous night yet. In Hanoi, air defense crews fire until their launch rails are empty. Colonel Pham Tuan watches the radar screen pulse and blur under jamming. Targets overlap. Returns smear together. He orders launches anyway. Some missiles find their mark. Another B-52 falls. The cheers this time are muted, because the bombing intensifies. The Americans have identified the missile belts. They strike them first, then strike again. Command nodes vanish. Communication lines go dead. Crews fight blind. The ground shakes without pause. The city no longer feels like a city. It feels like a target map being erased. Inside underground leadership bunkers, the conversation changes tone entirely. There is no talk of endurance now, only cost. How long can repairs continue without fuel? How long can air defenses function without replacements? How long before civilian morale, carefully managed for years, begins to fracture under sustained, visible devastation? These are not abstract questions. They are measured in days. Back in Washington, Nixon watches updates arrive through the night. Losses are reported. Damage assessments follow. Kissinger sits nearby, quiet, absorbing the rhythm of it all. The strikes are achieving exactly what they were designed to do. Not victory, leverage. Hanoi's leadership is being forced to confront a reality they had long avoided. The United States is willing, at least briefly, to abandon restraint. And that changes the equation entirely. On December 28th, the bombers strike again, and again. By now, even hardened North Vietnamese commanders recognize the pattern. This is no longer about sending messages through intermediaries or posturing at the negotiating table. This is about time compression. The Americans are collapsing years of potential damage into days. Endurance, once their greatest weapon, has become a liability. In Paris, quiet messages begin to move. Not public statements, not declarations. Signals. Willingness to return to talks. Willingness to reconsider terms previously dismissed. Willingness to stop waiting for American resolve to fade. The bombers do not stop immediately. They don't need to. The message has landed. On December 29th, McCarthy flies his final mission of the campaign. The bombing feels different now. Less resistance, fewer launches, more empty sky. When the bombs fall, the aircraft lifts cleanly. No close calls, no violent shudder. As they turn away, McCarthy looks down once more at the city below. He does not feel relief. He feels finality. something has shifted. Within days, Hanoi agrees to resume negotiations, not because they have been defeated, but because the cost of waiting has become unbearable. The illusion that American power was loud but ultimately restrained has been shattered. The bombers return to Guam, the skies over Hanoi grow quiet, and the war enters its final phase, changed forever by 11 nights when patience was replaced by pressure and mockery gave way to calculation. But the true consequences of that decision, political, moral, and historical, are only beginning to unfold. January 8, 1973, 9:14 a.m., Paris, France. The room is quiet in a way that feels earned. Heavy curtains dull the winter light. Coffee cups sit untouched. Across the table, delegations face one another with practiced stillness. No smiles, no theatrics. Just paper, pens, and the weight of the last 3 weeks. For the first time in months, North Vietnam has returned to the table. Henry Kissinger sits slightly hunched, glasses low on his nose, listening more than speaking. He has learned that silence can be as effective as pressure, especially after pressure has already done its work. Across from him, North Vietnamese negotiators are measured, careful. Their tone is different now. Not conciliatory, not defeated. Calculated. The bombing has stopped, but its echo fills the room. Back in Hanoi, the city exhales for the first time since December. Smoke still clings to damaged districts. Repair crews work day and night, salvaging what they can. Missile sites are quiet. The skies remain empty. For civilians, the silence feels unreal. For leadership, it is conditional. They know the bombers can return. That knowledge changes everything. General Vo Nguyen Giap reviews updated damage reports. Infrastructure losses are quantified. Recovery timelines estimated. The figures are sobering, but manageable, if there is time. Time is now the central variable. The war will continue. The North believes this deeply, but the method has shifted. The objective is no longer to test American patience through endless delay. It is to secure terms, then outlast what comes next. In Washington, the political calculation moves just as quickly. President Nixon addresses advisors behind closed doors. The strikes achieved their aim. Negotiations are back on track. American prisoners of war are expected to return. The United States can begin disengaging on its own terms. Publicly, Nixon speaks of peace with honor. Privately, he understands the cost. Linebacker II did not end the war. It ended a belief. The belief that the United States would always stop short. That belief had shaped Hanoi's strategy for years. Now it is gone. At Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, the crews begin to stand down. Colonel James McCarthy watches as aircraft are inspected, repaired, logged. Some crews are missing. Some planes will never fly again. The runways feel strangely empty without the constant rhythm of departures. He is debriefed, praised, then released. No ceremony, just exhaustion. McCarthy understands what most of the public never will. The campaign was not about destruction alone. It was about clarity, about compressing uncertainty into a moment too sharp to ignore. He wonders how history will judge it. He does not yet know that historians will argue for decades. The Paris Peace Accords are signed on January 27, 1973. American forces will withdraw. Prisoners will be exchanged. The war, at least for the United States, is officially ending. The bombing of Hanoi is already receding into abstraction, numbers, dates, arguments. But for those who lived beneath it, flew it, planned it, and endured it, the memory is precise. The sound, the timing, the moment the sky itself seemed to choose a side. In North Vietnam, leaders mark the outcome quietly. They have not surrendered. They have not conceded their long-term goal. But they have learned something vital. American power, when unleashed without pause, is not symbolic. It is systemic. and systems break other systems. Not immediately, but decisively. For the United States, the lesson is more complicated. The campaign demonstrated overwhelming capability, but also raised questions that will never be fully resolved. Was it necessary? Was it too late? Was the illusion broken or merely replaced by another? The answers depend on who you ask and where they were standing when the bombs fell. As the final B-52s are reassigned and the war slips from headlines into history, one truth remains undeniable. For years, leaders had claimed victory was near. Maps were colored, numbers were counted, confidence was projected. But it was not progress that forced a reckoning. It was reality, delivered in 11 nights from the sky, with no room left for illusion.
February 1973, Hanoi. The city is quieter now, but it is not calm. Repair crews move through shattered rail yards and scorched neighborhoods with practiced efficiency. Concrete is cleared, steel is salvaged. New power lines are strung beside the blackened remains of old ones. Life resumes, not because the damage was small, but because endurance has always been the North's greatest discipline. General Vaughan Nguyen Giap walks through briefings with a measured expression. The immediate crisis has passed. The bombers are gone. Negotiations have bought time. But no one mistakes this for victory. The bombing has not changed the ultimate goal. North Vietnam will continue the war through its allies in the South. What has changed is tempo. The leadership now understands something they once dismissed. American power, when politically unleashed, can compress years of damage into days. That knowledge will shape every future calculation. They will never again assume restraint. In the South, the effects are immediate and unsettling. With American airpower withdrawn and US ground forces departing, the balance shifts quietly but decisively. South Vietnamese units inherit responsibility for a war that has not truly ended, only changed hands. Commanders study the Paris Accords with care. The ceasefire is fragile. Violations are inevitable. Everyone knows it. The B-52s will not return, and everyone plans accordingly. Back in the United States, the war enters a new phase: memory. Newspapers debate Linebacker II endlessly. Some call it necessary, others call it barbaric. Congressional hearings dissect target lists and casualty estimates. Analysts argue whether the bombing forced negotiations or merely accelerated an outcome already inevitable. The public is divided, but one thing is consistent: the war is finally over for them. Prisoners come home. Uniforms disappear from campuses. Draft notices stop arriving. The cost fades slowly. Colonel James McCarthy returns to civilian life, carrying a weight he does not discuss easily. When asked about the bombing, he speaks carefully. He talks about orders, about discipline, about crews who did their jobs under impossible pressure. He does not talk about the moments between missile warnings, or the way Hanoi looked from altitude, or the silence after landing, when no one spoke because there were no words that fit. Those memories remain his. Historians will later argue that Linebacker II proved the war could have been ended sooner, if power had been applied decisively earlier. Others will argue the opposite, that no amount of bombing could alter a political struggle rooted in ideology and nationalism. Both sides will cite data. Both will miss something essential. The bombing did not end the war. It ended a narrative. For years, US leaders had claimed victory was near because admitting uncertainty felt unbearable. Progress had been measured, packaged, presented. But the reality of Vietnam was never linear. It was adaptive, patient, human. Linebacker II forced that reality into the open, not by explaining it, but by colliding with it. For 11 nights, the illusion held no ground, and once broken, it could never be restored. 2 years later, in April 1975, Saigon will fall. No bombers will fly to stop it. No speeches will promise reversal. The war's final image will not be one of fire from the sky, but of helicopters lifting away from rooftops, carrying the last Americans out. And in hindsight, Linebacker II will stand not as a conclusion, but as a final, violent punctuation mark in a conflict already moving toward its end. The lesson it leaves behind is uncomfortable. Power can force decisions. It cannot guarantee outcomes. Illusions can sustain wars for years. Reality ends them suddenly. And in Vietnam, reality arrived not quietly, but with a sound that shook the earth, and a silence that followed when there was nothing left to pretend.
Before you leave, remember this. Wars don't disappear when the fighting ends. They disappear when the stories stop being told. The Vietnam War wasn't just maps, speeches, or dates. It was nights in the jungle, letters never answered, decisions made by young men who didn't know history would forget them. When these stories fade, the lessons fade with them. And when the lessons fade, mistakes return. That's why these diary-style narrations matter. They keep the human truth alive, so the cost is remembered, not repeated. If these stories mean something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your voice helps keep these memories alive. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.